Good evening and welcome to our live coverage of the Starlink 6-29 mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. You're looking live at Space Launch Complex 40, where a Falcon 9 rocket is standing by for liftoff. SpaceX has scheduled tonight's mission for 2:27 a.m. Eastern Time. That's 0:27 UTC for our viewers around the world. This launch was originally scheduled for 11:01 p.m. this evening, but SpaceX was a little late getting the rocket out to the launch pad. It went vertical at pad 40 at about 10 p.m. That's much later than we would have expected for an 11:01 p.m. launch, and in fact SpaceX delayed the launch to 1:47 and then again to 2:27 a.m. I'm Stephen Young, and I'll be providing commentary from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau at the Kennedy Space Center press site. Will Robinson-Smith has the night off. He just completed a 2-day drive back from Starbase in Texas, where he was covering the second test flight of SpaceX's Starship booster. Adam Bernstein, who got back a little earlier from Starbase, who also was there helping to man our cameras and set up remote photography at the launch pad, is here tonight, and he'll be tracking the launch and making sure all of our cameras here at the Space Center are working. Also joining us tonight is Michael Kane. He'll be helping us out with still photography. It's now less than 55 minutes before the advertised launch time for tonight's Falcon 9 mission. It's carrying 23 Starlink satellites. This will be the third launch of Starlink satellites in less than 5 days. The first one came on Saturday morning, just after midnight at 12:05 a.m. Eastern Time, that launch from Cape Canaveral, and was followed on Monday by another Starlink launch, this time from the West Coast, from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. 23 satellites flying from the Cape on Saturday morning, and that was followed by 22 more satellites from Vandenberg. If you'd like to support our coverage of the space program, please hit the like button and click subscribe so you get notifications when new videos are posted and you don't miss any of our live streams. And also, please share this stream. It helps more people find our live coverage and everything else going on with our channel. We can't do these broadcasts without the support of our members and viewers, so we'd like to thank everyone who's made a contribution to help fund our coverage. If you'd like to help support and expand this coverage of the space program, we would love it if you would consider making a donation through YouTube's Super Chat feature or by becoming a member of our YouTube channel. Membership grants you access to our special members-only videos, as well as discounts on our online store. I'd like to thank Josh King and Diane Bond for their Super Chat contributions. Much appreciated. We absolutely cannot provide this kind of coverage without the support of our viewers, and it really helps us get new equipment, new cameras, so that we can bring you different views of these launches, both here at Cape Canaveral and increasingly at Starbase in Texas as SpaceX ramps up its Starship program. If you're not able to make a donation, just hitting the like button really helps us. So please go ahead and do that and consider subscribing to the channel. For those of us who haven't joined us on a recent launch, SpaceX is no longer providing the news media with mission audio. We do get a feed from SpaceX starting about 5 minutes before the liftoff, and we'll bring that to you here with the countdown audio on that feed. We've been following SpaceX launches from the Space Coast since the beginning, so we'll be able to guide you through the count and talk about some of the visual cues that will let us know that things are running on track. SpaceX oversees the countdown from its Hangar X facility here at Kennedy Space Center. That's also where they refurbish Falcon 9 boosters and prepare them for flight. They also have a facility there where they encapsulate the Starlink satellites like those on tonight's mission. SpaceX is also supporting this launch from control rooms at their headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Once again, liftoff is currently scheduled for 2:27 a.m. Eastern Time. The launch window tonight closes at 2:59, or the final opportunity of the night is at 2:59. But as far as we know, SpaceX is still tracking towards a liftoff at 2:27 a.m. Let's take a look at the countdown timeline for tonight's Starlink mission. Coming up, the SpaceX launch director should be polling their team in the Launch Control Center. That poll takes place electronically. The various ground controllers will state whether they are go or no go with a mouse click. If all looks good, the launch director will give the go for propellant load, which will get underway at the T-minus 35-minute mark. It begins with the loading of RP1, that's rocket-grade kerosene. That will be loaded aboard the first and second stages. Also, the loading of liquid oxygen on the first stage will get underway at that time. The next major milestone will be the start of liquid oxygen loading on the second stage. That will begin at the T-minus 16-minute point. Prior to that, we'll see the chill down of the strongback structure at the launch pad. That process releases a large cloud of vapor that will be clearly visible. It chills down the plumbing that runs up and down that strongback structure that is alongside the vehicle. It's actually now a little obscured in our vantage point here by the new crew tower, but you can just make it out between the tower and the vehicle. Next up, at T-minus 7 minutes, the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines will get underway. This involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps. That will protect the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. At about 6 minutes prior to launch, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. And then at about 4.5 minutes, we'll see the process to start retracting the strongback begin. It will recline to an angle of about 1.5 degrees, leaning back ever so slightly from the Falcon 9, where it will stay until liftoff. And then at the moment of liftoff, that strongback will pull back in a more rapid fashion to clear the way for the climb of the Falcon 9 off the launch pad. At T-minus 2 minutes, the loading of liquid oxygen should be complete. At this point, the Falcon 9 will be fully loaded with about 1 million pounds of propellant. The flight computer will take control of the final minute of the countdown at T-minus 1 minute, and the propellant tanks will be brought up to flight. If all is looking good, we should hear the go for launch from the SpaceX launch director. That'll be followed at T-minus 3 seconds by the engine ignition command. If all 9 engines ignite and are healthy, the flight computer will give the command to release the hold down clamps, and the Falcon 9 will lift off. So now less than 40 minutes to the launch time of the Falcon 9. We've not had any updates from SpaceX yet. We'll be looking out for the start of propellant load coming up at the T-minus 35-minute mark. You should be able to see signs of vapor when that process begins. If indeed SpaceX is continuing to target 2:27 a.m. for this morning's liftoff. Just a reminder that SpaceX still has 2 more launch opportunities this morning, should it need them. The next one will occur at 2:47 a.m. and the second opportunity, which is also the last opportunity of the night, occurs at 2:59 and 40 seconds. T-minus 36 minutes and counting. Should be coming up on that point where fueling begins, if everything is on track. Well, we've passed the milestone in the countdown where they should have begun the loading of propellants aboard the Falcon 9. At this point in the countdown, kerosene, RP-1 rocket-grade kerosene is being loaded aboard the first and second stages, and liquid oxygen will be loaded aboard the first stage. However, as I pointed out earlier, we don't have any mission audio from SpaceX. They no longer provide that to us. So we are awaiting any update from SpaceX or the signs that fueling might have begun. Launch preparations were running behind schedule earlier, and that resulted in this launch attempt slipping to the current targeted time of 2:27 a.m. So it's not clear if SpaceX fully caught up with all the countdown preparations to be ready for the start of propellant load, but if they have started, we should begin to see some vapors around the base of the rocket. Once SpaceX starts that process of loading propellants, the launch time is set in stone. They cannot recycle the countdown and attempt to launch at a different time. So if they start that process, we should be confident that the countdown will continue towards that point, and assuming there's no technical issues, that we'll see a liftoff at that time. However, they do still have those additional opportunities tonight, should they need them. Like to thank Janine Della Saria, hope I pronounced your name right, for her Super Chat donation. Much appreciated. Really helps us bring you this coverage. Still keeping an eye out for the signs that propellant loading has begun. We're not seeing obvious signs of vapor currently, but the visibility is a little difficult. It's a little misty and hard to see the details of the booster. But if that propellant load has indeed begun, we should really be seeing some swirling of propellants, the vapor from the cold propellants inside the tank. The vapors are actually created by the atmosphere, the moisture in the atmosphere condensing against the cold surface of the propellant tanks. And it does look like SpaceX is adjusting the launch time. They're going to shift it back to 2:47 a.m. So propellant loading did not get underway. We haven't seen any signs of that, so that's no big surprise at this point. We'll adjust our countdown clock momentarily to bring you the new countdown time. Our clock is now adjusted. We've wound the clock back. We're now 50 minutes away from tonight's launch. SpaceX updated their website just a short while ago with that time. Just a reminder, if you haven't done so already, you can support our coverage just by clicking the like button. That really helps us out. Also want to thank everyone who's made a super chat donation tonight. That also helps fund our coverage. So if you're just joining us, you're looking live at Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, where SpaceX is racing to get a Falcon 9 ready for launch. It's now targeting 2:47 a.m. We've had so many launch times this morning. We're now looking at a launch at 2:47 a.m. That's 45 minutes away from now. They were a little late getting the Falcon 9 upright on the launch pad. We have seen some venting from the ground support equipment that indicates the preparations for fueling had got underway, but obviously they were not ready for the 2:27 a.m. launch time that we were ticking down towards earlier tonight. So they've pushed it back by 20 minutes. They do have one more launch opportunity tonight that comes at 2:59. But hopefully at this point, the SpaceX launch director is getting ready to conduct their go, no-go poll that will clear this rocket for launch. We don't hear those polls. They take place electronically. And SpaceX no longer provides us with mission audio, so we won't hear the launch director give the verdict of that poll as to whether they are going for propellant load. So we'll be on the lookout for an update from SpaceX to say that propellant loading is underway, or we may catch a glimpse of the vapors forming around the base of the Falcon 9 when that process begins. So while we wait to hear if SpaceX is proceeding with tonight's countdown and starting the loading of propellants, which should get underway at the T-minus 35-minute mark, let's take a look at the launch trajectory for tonight's flight. The Falcon 9 will lift off from the pad at Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. It will fly in a southeast trajectory towards the Caribbean. Following stage separation, the first stage will land on one of SpaceX's 3 drone ships. The one on deck tonight is called a shortfall of gravitas. It's about the size of a football field and is equipped with steering propellers that keep it stationary in the ocean so that the Falcon 9 can make a touchdown in that bullseye that you see in the center of the drone ship. Meanwhile, the upper stage of the Falcon 9 will continue towards orbit with the Starlink satellites. The fairings that encase the Starlink satellites will be jettisoned and parachute to a splashdown in the ocean a bit further downrange from where the drone ship is located, and SpaceX will use its recovery ship Bob to scoop up those fairings out of the water. It has 2 of those recovery ships. Doug is currently undergoing maintenance, but those recovery ships were named after the former NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley. They were the pair that flew aboard the Dragon Demo 2 mission, the first crewed mission to the International Space Station by a SpaceX Dragon capsule. SpaceX did share an image of the recovery of those fairings. This was from a mission some weeks ago now, and SpaceX noted that the fairing that was being fished out of the ocean in this photograph was actually making its 13th flight. Well, we're now approaching that point where we believe the SpaceX launch director will be making the call on whether to start the loading of propellants aboard the Falcon 9. We're at T-minus 38 minutes. Let's take a quick look at the payload for this mission. You can see a file photo of what the Starlink V2 mini satellites look like when they're stacked in launch configuration. They're basically flat packed inside the rocket's payload fairing, one on top of another. You can see the silver retention rod that runs up the side of the satellites. This is what holds them in place during the launch. When the point of separation arrives, about 1 hour and 5 minutes into flight, that retention rod will swing away from the Starlink satellites. The satellites do not have a ejection mechanism of any sort. They just simply drift apart. There are 23 satellites on this particular mission. It is the 36th launch of the so-called V2 mini satellites. It will also be the 56th Starlink launch of this year. Each of the satellites weighs about 1,760 pounds or 800 kilograms. After the solar panels unfurl, it has a wingspan of about 100 feet or 30 meters. Once in orbit, they'll use argon hole thrusters to maneuver. That's a type of ion engine. The satellites were built at a SpaceX facility in Redmond, Washington, which is near Seattle. To date, SpaceX hasn't published a rendering or photo of the V2 mini satellites. But we do have one photo of a satellite in orbit. It was taken by the Australian company Heo Robotics from one of its satellites. They claim this was the first direct observation of a Starlink V2 mini. And you can see the two solar panels extending from the main body of the satellite. So we now do have confirmation from SpaceX that propellant load is underway. That process began at the T-minus 35 minute mark. started with the loading of kerosene, rocket-grade kerosene, aboard the first and second stages of the Falcon 9, and also the start of liquid oxygen load into the first stage. We'll soon start to see the signs of vapors building up around the base of the rocket, so keep an eye out for that. Just a reminder, if you haven't done so already, please hit the like button on this stream. It really helps us out, brings our coverage to a wider audience. In addition to confirming the start of propellant load, SpaceX also has said that the weather is looking good for tonight's launch. We can now see those vapors starting to stream off the outer surface of the Falcon 9's first stage liquid oxygen tank as those propellants start to flow into the vehicle. Those vapors are created by the moisture in the air condensing on the cold structure of the rocket as the propellant starts to fill the tanks. We have a few light clouds in the area tonight, but mostly clear skies, so we're hoping for some great views. Our friend Pete Carstens is manning the big tracking camera tonight. We hope to see some spectacular views of the Falcon 9 heading to the southeast. T-minus 30 minutes and counting to the launch of the Falcon 9. Liftoff is scheduled for 2:47 tonight. In addition to loading kerosene aboard the first and second stages and liquid oxygen on the first stage, another operation is underway. Cryogenic helium is being loaded into storage spheres aboard the Falcon 9, actually inside the propellant tanks. That cryogenic helium will be used to pressurize the tanks and force the propellants into the engine plumbing. The process starts with the loading of helium into the first stage tanks and then moves on to the second stage tanks. The loading of helium into the second stage should begin in about a minute, and the helium load into the first stage has already been underway. We're now approaching the point in the countdown where the loading of RP1 rocket-grade kerosene on the second stage will be nearing completion. Let's take a quick look at the mission stats for this flight. This is the 15th flight of the booster tail number 1067. It will be the 276th Falcon 9 launch to date. It's also the 82nd Falcon 9 launch of 2023. And it's the 220th time a Falcon 9 first stage booster has been reflown. It's SpaceX's 86th orbital launch of 2023. One interesting way of looking at the metrics is to review the number of launches in the last 365 days. And SpaceX will have chalked up 95 launches in that time, with today's launch if it goes ahead as planned. This will also be the 156th SpaceX orbital launch from Pad 40 and the 211th overall orbital launch from this pad. It will also be the 65th orbital launch attempt from Cape Canaveral this year. Now less than a minute away from the so-called big vent, that's the chill down of the liquid oxygen lines on the strung back. We'll see that coming up in about 10 seconds. There you can see the vent being blown by the wind to the north of the pad. This is part of preparations for the start of loading of liquid oxygen aboard the second stage of the Falcon 9. Chills down the propellant lines that run up the strung back structure that sits alongside the Falcon 9 at the launch pad. In about 3 minutes, it will be used to flow liquid oxygen into the second stage propellant tank. Now less than 19 minutes to the launch of the Falcon 9 with 23 Starlink satellites. I'd like to thank everyone who's joined us for our coverage at this early hour of the morning. If you want to support what we do, please consider making a donation through the Super Chat feature. You can also become a member of our channel and support us that way. You'll also get access to bonus video. And of course, you can simply hit the like button, which also really helps us out. We're now at T-minus 17 minutes and counting. The big vent will be wrapping up soon, and then the loading of liquid oxygen aboard the second stage will get underway. You can see that vent is starting to dissipate now. Chill down of those lines is complete. That process is carried out to make sure that when the liquid oxygen starts flowing, it doesn't immediately boil off. This will be the 15th flight of this particular booster, which has the tail number B1067. Let's take a look at the flight history. This booster debuted back in June 2021 on the CRS-22 mission. This was a NASA cargo delivery flight to the International Space Station. It sent up more than 7,300 pounds of science and supplies to the orbiting outpost, along with a pair of rollout solar arrays. Next up for B1067 was its first human mission. That was for the Crew 3 launch on November 11th, 2021. Its third launch came just over a month later on December 19th with the Turksat 5B launch. B1067 flew a fourth time in April, on April 27th, 2022, supporting the astronauts of the Crew 4 mission. That crew included NASA astronaut Jessica Watkins, who became the first Black woman to serve alongside a long-duration mission in space. This was also the debut of the fourth and newest Crew Dragon spacecraft, dubbed Freedom. On July 14th, there was another flight of a Cargo Dragon on B1067's fifth flight. This time it carried more than 5,800 pounds to the space station. Its sixth flight was its first Starlink mission. It was the Starlink Group 4-34 on September 19th, 2022. Launch 7 was of the geostationary satellite Hotbird 13G for Eutelsat, and that launched on November 3rd, 2022. 1067's final launch of 2022 came on December 16th, when it launched SES's O3b mPOWER 1 and 2 satellites. Missions 9 through 11 were all Starlink launches. These included Starlink 5-2, 5-5, and 5-9. Its 12th launch came on June 18th when it launched Satara, a communication satellite for the Indonesian company PSN. It was then back on Starlink duty, launching the 6-10 mission and the 6-22 flights. That was its most recent mission, back on October 13th. Now less than 12 minutes to the launch of the Falcon 9 with the 23 Starlink satellites. Let's take a closer look at the Falcon 9 vehicle. It stands 70 meters or 229 feet tall and has a diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet. The first stage is the bottom 2/3 of the rocket. Today's first stage booster has flown 14 times before. It is designated tail number 1067. At the base of the first stage are the 9 Merlin engines, which burn rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen to produce 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Around the engine compartment are the black carbon fiber landing legs that are used to land the first stage on the drone ship. Above the first stage is the interstage. This is a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core surrounded by carbon fiber. In the inset image, you can see the deployable hypersonic grid fins. These are titanium winglets that provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it falls through the atmosphere, tail first like a dart. At the top of the interstage are 3 mechanical latches that attach to the second stage. At first stage main engine cutoff, high pressure helium is used to release those latches, and 4 pneumatic pushes ensure there is a clean separation between the stages. The second stage engine nozzle is safely housed inside the interstage adapter until stage separation. The upper stage is powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine, or MVAC. It's equipped with a large nozzle optimized for burns in the vacuum of space. It produces more than 200,000 pounds of thrust, and it will be fired twice on today's flight to place the 23 Starlink satellites into their intended orbit. The MVAC engine burns the same propellant mix of kerosene and liquid oxygen as the first stage. It will ignite a third time after the deployment of the Starlink satellites. That will be a deorbit burn to drive the upper stage back into the atmosphere where it will burn up. That eliminates the risk of creating any unnecessary space debris on this mission. At the very top of the rocket is the payload fairing containing the 23 Starlink satellites. The fairing is made of a carbon composite material and is 13.1 meters or 43 feet tall and 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. The two halves of the payload fairing will be recovered a little further downrange, where the first stage will land on the drone ship. They will gently splash down on parachutes, and the recovery ship Bob will fish them out of the water and return them to Cape Canaveral for refurbishment and reuse. Now less than 7 minutes to the launch of the Falcon 9. At this point in the countdown, the chill down of the Merlin engines is underway. That will prevent any thermal shock during the engine start sequence, which begins at the T-minus 3 second mark. Big thanks to Roseanne for her Super Chat donation. Much appreciated. I'm glad you enjoyed the review of the Falcon 9 vehicle. If you want to support our coverage, please drop a Super Chat. It's much appreciated. Really helps us bring this coverage to you. Coming up on the T-minus 5 minute mark. Just had confirmation from SpaceX that the tanks are pressurizing for the start of strongback retract. We'll be able to listen in now to the SpaceX countdown. That strongback structure will start to move away from the vehicle very shortly. You can hear some of the hisses and bangs as vents occur at the launch pad.
Strongback retract.
There's confirmation that the strongback retract has begun. Taking a look at this view from SpaceX, you can see the clamps have opened up from around the top of the second stage that held the strongback and the Falcon 9 together, and that strongback structure is gently moving away. It'll move away to an angle of 1.5 degrees. You'll notice there's a little bit of discrepancy between our countdown clock and the SpaceX countdown clock. The clock in the top right-hand corner is working in real time. The SpaceX clock is coming with a little bit of delay. Now less than 3 minutes to launch.
Stage 1 lock slot is complete.
We have confirmation that the first stage is now fully loaded with liquid oxygen. Loading of oxygen aboard the second stage should be wrapping up shortly. The vehicle's autonomous destruct system is being armed.
Stage 2 lock slot is complete.
And there we have confirmation that the loading of liquid oxygen on the second stage is complete. The Falcon 9 is now fully loaded and ready for launch. 1 million pounds of propellants aboard the vehicle.
Ground gas closeouts.
Coming up on the 1 minute mark where the onboard computers will take control of the countdown.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
We have that confirmation that the onboard computers have taken over control of the countdown. Final pressurization of the propellant tanks is underway. Let's listen in for the launch director's final go.
Go for launch.
There we have it. The launch director has given their final go for launch. We're 30 seconds away from the liftoff of the Falcon 9. "15 seconds. Look out for the green flash of ignition. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, ignition, and liftoff. Liftoff of the Falcon 9, carrying 23 Starlink satellites into orbit. The Falcon 9 has cleared the Lightning Towers. We'll soon start to hear the rumble of the Falcon 9's 9 Merlin engines. Everything looking good. 30 seconds into flight. Approaching the point of maximum dynamic pressure, the Merlin engines will throttle down. Beautiful smoke rings, 2 smoke rings as the Falcon 9 climbs. This view coming from Pete Costin's tracking camera. Falcon 9 has passed through the point of maximum dynamic pressure. It's heading on a southeasterly trajectory downrange from the Cape. Beautiful views coming from Pete Costin's tracking camera showing the plumes of the Falcon 9. Switching to Adam Bernstein's view from here at the Kennedy Space Center. back to peak Carstens. We're coming up on the shutdown of the 9 Merlin engines. Be followed by stage separation, ignition of the second stage, and that will be followed shortly afterwards by there we have the main engine cutoff. And ignition of the second stage. We can see that view from onboard cameras on the right of your screen. Getting views on the larger image on the left from Pete Carson's tracking camera, showing the second stage and a plume expanding, the deployment of the fairing halves. We'll see that now in the SpaceX feed. There you see it, and we get our first view of the Starlink satellites inside the fairing. The view on the top right is from the first stage cameras looking back towards Florida. Below that is a view of the Merlin engine, the Merlin vacuum engine, firing, burning, glowing red hot. Continuing to track the second stage with Pete's tracking system.
Trajectory.
May see some stars flying by as the second stage continues. It's now at an altitude of 132 kilometers. Meanwhile, the first stage continues to coast upwards. It's at an altitude of 118 kilometers. It will continue to arc upwards as it heads downrange. It's got plenty of momentum after that 2.5 minute burn of the 9 Merlin engines, but eventually it will reach the top of the hill and we'll start to see the altitude come down. It's currently at 116 kilometers and starting to descend 115. Meanwhile, the second stage is accelerated to about 11,500 kilometers per hour. It's at an altitude of 152 kilometers. Continuing to get great views. We'll be coming up on the entry burn soon. That's a very important burn that the Falcon 9's first stage has to make in order to avoid burning up in the atmosphere. You can see on those gauges in the bottom left of the screen that the velocity is building as the altitude drops. And without this upcoming entry burn, the Falcon 9 booster would burn up as it encountered friction with the atmosphere as it plunges back to Earth. We're hoping that Pete may be able to get us some views of that entry burn.
Stage 1 FTS has safed.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
And that entry burn is now underway. Appears that might be occurring behind clouds from our vantage point here, so we'll take the view from
Stage 2 FTS has safed.
take the view
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
from SpaceX's cameras, and that burn is now complete. That was about a 21-second burn to slow the Falcon 9. Looks like we may have got a quick glimpse Still getting some images from Pete. That might be the first or second stage, a little hard to tell.
Stage 1 transonic.
Stage 1 is now traveling under the speed of sound at an altitude of 6 kilometers, slowing down as it approaches the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas, which is located east of the Bahamas. It's about 400 or so miles downrange.
Stage 1 landing burn.
The landing burn is underway, but we don't have video. Here we have video coming from the surface of the drone ship.
Landing light deploy.
And touchdown.
Stage 1 landing confirmed.
Looks like a perfect landing for the booster 1067 on its 15th flight, standing by for cutoff.
And back shutdown.
And there we have cutoff of the second stage.
Nominal orbit insertion.
SpaceX has confirmed a nominal orbit insertion. The second stage completed its first burn to place the Starlink satellites into a parking orbit. We'll now enter a long coast phase before reigniting at the T plus 54-minute mark. It's just a small 2-second burn at that point to finalize the orbit before the deployment of the Starlink satellites. The 23 satellites will be released from the top of the second stage at the T plus 1 hour, 5 minute, and 21-second mark. So to recap, after SpaceX fell behind with launch preparations, the liftoff slipped to 2:47 a.m. this morning. But when the fueling process began, everything ran smoothly, and the Falcon 9 lifted off, headed downrange from the Cape. The first stage booster separating and making a landing on the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas in the Atlantic Ocean, and the second stage reaching its parking orbit. So everything on track with this launch so far. SpaceX has ended its live feed of video, and we're no longer able to follow the rest of the mission as it happens. This was the third Starlink launch for SpaceX in the last 4 days and a couple of hours. Launched another mission with 23 satellites from here at the Cape early Saturday morning, just after midnight. And another 22 satellites were put into orbit after a launch from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California early Monday morning. So let's just take another look at the mission statistics. This was the 15th flight of Booster 1067. It was the 276th Falcon 9 launch to date, the 82nd Falcon 9 launch of 2023, and the 220th Falcon booster reflight. So far in 2023, this was the 86th orbital launch for SpaceX. It was also the 95th SpaceX launch in the last 365 days. And those statistics don't include the Starship test flights, which were suborbital in nature. It was also the 156th SpaceX orbital launch from Pad 40, and the 211th overall mission to fly from that pad. It's also the 65th orbital launch attempt from Cape Canaveral this year. Before we go, like to thank Roleri7 for their super chat donation. It's much appreciated. If you haven't done so, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and you'll get notifications when we go live for future launches. Our next launch from the Cape is going to be another Starlink launch. Expecting that launch around the 27th. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for this late night, early morning liftoff of a Falcon 9 rocket. If you are interested in seeing more photos from our photographers, you should follow Michael and Adam on social media. Want to thank both of them for their support tonight, bringing the video that we've enjoyed and photographs that we'll be seeing as they get those off their cameras and onto the internet. Also like to thank Pete Carstens for providing tracking camera footage of the spectacular ascent of the Falcon 9 earlier tonight. So I'll leave you with one last look at Space Launch Complex 40, the empty launch pad, the strung back structure leaning back following the launch. So thank you again for joining us. I wish you a very good night or good morning, depending on where you are in the world.